Okay, good evening, class. And here's one of our flipped classrooms here on the Russian Revolution. The slide that you're looking at right now has to deal with the Russian government before the revolution. Now, Russia was probably was the last absolute monarchy left in Europe. Went all the way up until the beginning of the 20th century. All right, and the monarch there was called the Tsar. All right. Now, as this slide says, until 1905, the Tsar's powers were unlimited. Right? And then there was an uprising in 1905, and where he did institute some reforms, and he does allow a lawmaking body to come into being, a parliament called the Duma. Right? But political parties were outlawed, and he also used a very strong secret police called Cheka, which terrorized people, helped keep him in power. All right. So this sets us up for the Russian Revolution and Russia going from a absolute monarchy into a communist state, and then later into a totalitarian state. Okay, so the last Tsar of Russia was Nicholas II. He comes to power in 1894, and he stays, and he is finally abdicates or resigns from office in 1918. Then a couple years later, he is shot by him and his family are murdered by the Bolsheviks during the Russian Revolution. All right, uh, things are not going very well for Russia in the early 20th century. Uh, there's the Russo-Japanese War, which the Russians lost, because very unpopular, and then Russia's entry into World War I, which becomes very, very unpopular. Okay, so Russia enters World War One, and Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary because Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, and the Russians are allies with Serbia. And everyone worried about the Russians because the Russians at this time had the largest army, had about almost 1 million men in the army. But the war soon becomes very unpopular because the Russians, they might have a large army, but the Russians were not well trained and they were not well led. They had to start rationing. There was enough food to feed the civilians and the military. So yes, mass starvation's going on, and you also start having open hostility to the Tsar and his government. And since the Russians were not winning in World War One, that also adds to the unpopularity of the Tsar as well, and to the point where you start seeing breakout of, for instance, in some units in the army, you will have some communist sympathizers in there, and almost to the point where you start having mass mutinies as well. Okay, the first revolution is the March Revolution of 1917. All right, and this is led by the Mensheviks. And the Mensheviks, as opposed to the Bolsheviks, is that the Mensheviks are what we consider socialists. They're not truly communists. Where the Bolsheviks, which eventually wind up taking over, is are communists. All right. So Alexander Kerensky, he is the leader of the provisional government. He's a Menshevik, and the biggest issue that he has is that instead of getting out of World War One, he stays in World War One, and that is very unpopular with the majority of the population of Russia, which sets things up for the October Revolution of 1918. Okay, so Lenin, he is the leader of the Bolsheviks, and like I said before, that they are a communist organization. And the October Revolution, led by Vladimir Lenin, basically promises people peace, land, and bread, which means he's going to get the Russians out of World War One, He's going to make sure the people are fed. And then what he's going to do too, he's going to take the land that he believes belongs to the nobility and to the bourgeoisie, or the people who have wealthy landowners, and he's going to give them to the people. So he wins support of the people, including the peasants. Like I said, the Russians were an absolute monarchy, and you still have very much elements that would be very almost like feudalism in a way. I mean, they still had serfs up until the 19th century, and up to the 1800s. So very, very backward people politically and even industrially. I mean, the Industrial Revolution comes late to the Russians. So, anyways, Lenin has his October Revolution. The communists come to power. He promises peace, land, and bread, and then will have the Tsar shot as well, and his entire royal family murdered. Okay, so the Bolsheviks take charge. They sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and gets Russia out of World War One. Now, between 1990 and 1920, there's a civil war going on in Russia between the White Russians, who are the royal people who are loyal to the royal, to the Tsar, and the Mensheviks, which are, like I said, the socialists, and the Reds, the Red Russians, or the Bolsheviks, the communists from all directions. All right, and in 1920, the Bolsheviks defeat the White Russians, or the Reds defeat the White Russian. And red is a very common color. That is a socialist color, if you will. It actually deals with socialism and communism. Is the color of red. That's one reason why the Bolsheviks adopted red. And then you see that the flag of the Soviet Union was red and with a yellow hammer and sickle on it. Okay, so Lenin stays in power from about 1920 to 1924. Lenin does eventually die. He's not assassinated or anything, just dies of a stroke. So in the beginning, he institutes what's called war communism, and this was this idea it was going to be a truly communist state. It doesn't work. There's a lot of problems with it. People are not ready to give up all private property or all private businesses. So what he winds up doing, in the 1920s, he winds up doing what they call the new economic plan, economic reform, which he will allow some capitalist features within the economy. And this is really not big businesses. This is more like restaurants and small shops. Not major industries are not going to be capitalist. Just the small, like I said, more small shops, dressmakers, maybe some doctors, restaurants, if you will. Okay. The Bolshevik Party becomes a Communist Party, and then Russia becomes the United Soviet Socialist Republic. So basically what he does, he takes places that right now, if you were taking remember your map, like places like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Uzbekistan, Ukraine. These are all former Soviet republics. These actually are made up of the 15 socialist republics of the Soviet Union. Okay, so in 1924, Lenin dies. There's a power vacuum between two of Lenin's members, high-ranking members of the Communist Party. One is Leon Trotsky, and the other one is Joseph Stalin. However, Stalin takes control, he wins out, and he decides to create a totalitarian state. He decides to get rid of the new economic plan of Lenin and switch over to a truly communist and socialist state right there. Okay, so here's the characters of a totalitarian state. Make sure you get these in your notes right here. Pretty much total means exactly right, total control, and make sure you get everything into your notes right here on this. This is a very important slide to get your notes on. Okay, so when Stalin takes control of the Soviet Union, he has his idea of take control of the economy is that he has these 5-year economic plans. He basically says he wants to see in 5 years he wants to see 20% increase in the production of industry and farming. He has these ideas of these collective farms. So basically, what he does, he takes if you were like a farmer, he'll take your farm. He might take maybe 5 of your neighbor's farms or 10 of your neighbor's farms and put them all together to one giant farm, and then pretty much decide to go ahead and move people to work on these giant, huge collective farms here in order to try to increase agricultural output, which doesn't really work. And even his 5-year plans do not work as well. People who do not meet the required increase in growth were either sent to prison or executed. He was start sending these people to these out to Siberia into what we call the gulags. These were these giant prison labor camps where political prisoners would be sent, or he would just have you shot outright. He has the great purge of the 20s and the 30s in order to crush all opposition to him. Right? Most people were either shot and killed, or they were sent to die in a gulag. Russia was very, very heavily Orthodox, what we call Russian Orthodox Christianity. He pretty much took away all freedom of religion, and a lot of the beautiful churches that were in Russia were either destroyed or turned into something else. All right. He also uses plenty of propaganda. This idea of, especially in his art called socialist realism, this idea of, and we'll see some pictures of this in class about socialist realism. This idea of the absolute perfect looking communist worker, if you will. And also, all education is controlled by the government. There are no private schools allowed.